Many people have problems with art and not with reality.
So why is art different?
It's pretty simple, right?
This is knowledge, this is thinking, this is thought.
Yeah, it does something strange with your head.
Welcome to the Undergang Armchair.
Bring it.
Welcome to the Undergang Armchair. My name is Ando. Well, here we are, back again. How is everybody doing? I've been trotting about like the lucky man I am all summer, but I'm finally back home in Copenhagen, and I am chomping at the bit to get going again. Got some new projects in the works, which we are excited to unveil for you guys in the next coming months, but more on that later. We're kicking it off again with a killer conversation I had with Jesper Carlsen right before the summer break. He had a show which unfortunately just came down at Martin Asbæk Gallery, and we managed to grab him and get him into the armchair to talk about it, and god damn it was a lot of fun. I've personally always been a big fan of the crossover between technology and art, even if I've never really actually integrated it into my own practice. So it's really great to hear about work which kind of rides the bridge, the fence between these two worlds. It's current, it's interesting, and it's really, really engaging. So I'm not going to run my yap about news or anything, aside from the fact that the last guest we had on, Peter Voss Knude, his show is up at Overgalen for a few days. I believe it goes down on the 6th of August. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go ahead and treat yourself and do that. And that's it. So let's get straight to it. Enjoy my talk with Jesper Carlsen.
And for example, I love that idea of sort of, for example, stone. Sort of, it's everywhere, and they look sort of, but they can have sort of immensely sort of different characters. And if you, they have sort of millions of history in them. They come from different continents. Actually, sort of.
They're a lot older than we are.
No, yeah, it's sort of, if you hear sort of a geologist talking about them, they could have sort of, they can see something that might be, that could have been melted with a meteor sort of hitting from outer space. We're talking about one up in Norway, and they could see sort of from this stone that would be hit by a meteor for 500 million years ago. But that time Norway was around where sort of India is right now. So it's like sort of this small stone bears sort of the history will explode if you sort of know a bit more. And I kind of like this fact that in everything, sort of, it's both really common, but it also bears history, which actually is much greater than we can imagine. Sort of a little like sort of staring at the stars. But I actually think sort of every object actually has this kind of potential if you really look at it.
But it's also looking at it with wonder and humanity in your heart, not just cold science.
Yeah, but cold science, if you hear something about sort of Richard Feynman, for example, talking about the moving atoms in a cup, which is sort of, then cold science actually also becomes humanity, the jiggling of atoms heating, because they're heating, then it's because they're jiggling, and then they're jiggling your atoms, and you become sort of it's hardcore science, but it actually also becomes humanity, sort of jiggling atoms in your body. I kind of like that.
That was the name of this episode now, the jiggling atoms.
Yes.
Well, let me tell you why you're here.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is a little bit. The history is a little longer than you think. We've actually met once before, and this is many years ago.
Oh.
I used to work at Rammeværkstedet.
Oh. Yeah.
And you came in. I'm gonna guess this is around 2010 or something like that. I didn't know who you were, of course. I was fairly new in the country at the time, but you came in with these pieces of graph paper, which you had folded and cut and made in certain ways. And I think what I understood from you was that you were starting to work with Martin Asbæk, but it was still a little bit like not sure.
Yeah.
And you were going to show the like 4 works in a group show or something like that.
Yeah.
And then so we frame these very delicate, kind of very fine pieces of graph paper and off you went. And then, I don't know, at some point later, I noticed that you were connected to the gallery, but then we didn't really see you again. You didn't get much framed, or maybe I wasn't there that day. I worked part-time for many years.
No, but it's sort of, I would make different kind of things. So it's sort of a period. I have to get something framed, and then they can go in a long period.
Well, that's the thing too. So I saw this, and of course this speaks to the context when you see art. And I saw this and I thought, okay, paperwork.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I didn't look more into it. And then you have this show recently. I look into it, and then I'm like, oh shit, there's there's 3D animation here. There's sculpture. He's crashing drones in his apartment. There's all sorts of crazy shit happening here. And so I had just, of course, in my stupid passing moment, been like, oh, he folds paper. That's what he does.
Yeah.
And then later I'm like, oh, whoa, there's a whole bunch of other shit going on here.
I still fold paper sometimes.
That's good. Yeah. I'm happy to hear that. But you know what I mean? Like, I just had no idea because I hadn't followed up on it. Oh. And so that's why I wrote you immediately and was like, hey, let's talk about this, because I thought you were somebody else. And so I'm very interested in art and technology, which you seem to be working in. Yeah. And then you have a show that just opened last Friday, which I have not, unfortunately, seen yet. But that's why you're here, is essentially because you unfolded like a paperwork.
No, it's nice to hear sort of these sort of backstories, sort of where people actually sort of come to. Because, of course, I also come to know people from I've seen, and it kind of like it, but it's always sort of very different if. Yeah, you don't see the other side of things. At least if it doesn't end up in a podcast where people actually invite you in.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to sort of these different ways of. Yeah.
Well, it's a nice size, the whole Danish art world, because it's small enough that you see people again and again, but it's also big enough that you discover new things.
Yeah.
It's got that nice kind of not too big, not too large thing to it. So it's nice to have you. And then, of course, I did a little research and I tried to figure out a little bit what you did. I saw that you went to the Art Academy on Fyn.
Yes.
On the island west of here. Yeah. Did you grow up around here? Did you grow up?
No, I grew up in Aarhus.
Okay.
In Jutland.
And were you always on the way to art school, or did you start out something else?
Not really. Sort of. For many years, I thought I should be a carpenter, or sort of, or
that's a good Aarhus job.
Yeah, maybe or make furniture. I think I would like to, or design furniture, or sort of into.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, and then at some point. I was like, we met an artist. We were doing sort of technical school kind of. We were doing a folder, sort of doing desktop publishing before, sort of trying to get. And when we were doing it for sort of a school case, doing it for an artist, and I just thought that would be the perfect job. He sort of, when we came there, he was just getting up and just looked so relaxed, and I thought, that seems like a nice job.
Like, oh, hey man, far out.
But yeah. But then I more sort of digged into it. It was just, I don't know. I've never grown up in sort of. I have never sort of been sort of taken to museums really, and it just seems like an sort of intriguing something I couldn't quite grasp. Sort of, there were work to be done, and I couldn't really sort of let it go in a way. But then I actually became educated in electronics actually. Also, so I did. That was sort of 4.5 years. But then after that, I sort of like. No, I still want to try something.
So it stuck with you somehow.
Yeah. And then I took to what's called these high school.
Oh,
thing.
Right, yeah.
And then got me sort of introduced to actually someone within the sort of field, and then sort of.
So that's where someone can say, "This is art history."
Yeah, this is art history.
This is what's going on.
This is bad not because it's sort of generally bad. It's just because someone has made. Look at him. He has made this exactly same, just bigger and better. And that was like, okay, this is why you need someone from outside to sort of tell you, sort of help you a bit and sort of seeing this whole thing.
And I guess at some point someone told you there's such a thing as an art school.
Yeah, precisely.
Because I didn't know there was art schools until someone told me.
I knew it. I was sort of like, I think sort of when you're doing it yourself, you're like, but then I think. No, actually, before I get to, I also applied and didn't come in, and I was like, they're having this. But maybe that's because they don't really understand what I'm doing. Sort of like this misinterpreted artist, sort of like.
Right.
And that I sort of got blown away in sort of high school itself, like getting into it's not because there are just thousands of these paintings, sort of.
Right. There's a bigger picture here.
Yeah, and that sort of was the sort of place where I just need to work at this. I don't just need to see more and need to work at this and then try to get an idea of what's going on here. And,
it's funny how many Danish artists have come up through the high schools.
Yeah. No, but I think you actually, that is where you can actually make the leap if you come from a non-working artist kind of family. Right. Because I just think there actually is a big potential of actually keeping to that idea of being a misunderstood artist, but you will struggle, sort of kind of romantic,
drinking yourself to death.
Yeah, a romantic idea of it's just because people don't really understand how great I am. Sort of, there is this sort of fall group in LOS. Yeah, there's a potential problem, and to make the gap and to actually talk with someone which has experience within this, I think that's difficult. If you don't have the network for it, if you come from a different kind of network. And I think that's sort of the main thing that it could do. You can sort of pay intuition and you can come in and then the people are there that actually know something about the...
Well, we've talked about high schools before in the program, but just really quickly for people who may not know, it's a competitive education. It's education for education's sake. It's a system set up in the late 1800s, I believe, right?
Yeah.
By Grundtvig. And the idea is that it's an education for anybody from any background. In fact, it was kind of set up for farmers and people in order to have a chance to learn about something. And there's no degree. You don't go anywhere. You don't get anything. You gain knowledge. And it's also communal. You usually live together. You cook together. You clean together, But there's a bunch of them that do art. I was lucky enough to be able to teach one a little while back. And it was an amazing experience as someone who didn't come from this place. And, everyone eats together and people are studying different things. Each high school has different specialties. Yeah. And it's, just like you say, it's a place to get started if you want. Like, okay, I'm interested in learning about this. You can go to these places and do that.
No, but also sort of a complete difference. I met my now wife there, and she was sort of convinced she wanted to be an architect. But she sort of, she saw it and saw that it was not the job for her, and she went on to theology from there. So it's sort of a completely different kind of, but she liked the stay and she learned a lot, but sort of like, I like this fact that you can actually sort of feel a bit of... Right,
you can try it without saying, I'm going to do a 5-year education in this.
Yeah.
You can try for
and also
summer.
If you start the 5-year education, that I suspect sometimes you actually don't really get in touch with the actual workings of the business until much later on. And here you can actually get to know people and they can sort of... Yeah, I think there is sort of...
It's a no-risk way to try something, because maybe education, when you're talking about an education, let's just say to be an architect, it's the state has a say in it. There's goals, and we got to have these young people have to be ready for the job market when they come out. And there's all these other sort of ideas that go into it, which may or may not make it an ideal education. Yeah. So this has a lot more freedom in that.
Yeah, sense. And it takes into account that this being educated in something has much more implications than just the pensum. Sort of like an education is that you got to read this, but also the high school can also sort of grasp what is it actually to live like an artist. Sort of course, they come from a different. They want to sort of teach more widely, but still they can sort of give another angle to what it actually is to be an artist, live like an artist, and I think that's sort of. a special thing, and I hope also that can. I know it also for literature and sort of like people can actually sort of be a half year working like a
writing every day for 6
sort of
hours,
like actually sort of being it and sort of and then maybe going back to whatever they were doing or thinking this is what they're going to do, but it's very different than studying literature or sort of studying to be a journalist. So sort of like this is just hardcore. Now you're living this thing, and I think that's sort of a very special thing.
So there you were making bad paintings and feeling misunderstood. Did you like, so I mean, I imagine that high school experience really changed your whole idea. It educated you about the context of art or, the lifestyle, all those things. And then you started applying to the academies, which is the next step, right?
Yeah.
Which is, of course, is tricky in and of itself because here the academies are very small.
Yeah.
And they run kind of on current thinking of professors who accept people and but you got in and you went to Fyn. What was that experience like? Was that good? Was that disappointing after being at the high school or what?
No, I think it was good, but I think also you sort of hit reality, so it was also disappointing. But I really enjoyed it. Actually, I remember especially one time where I was just like, I cannot stand this whole scene. It's the same people and sort of this Danish system. I'm like, I will screw it. I will start an engineering degree. I want to do something completely different. And then my teacher said, "Oh, fine, that sounds interesting. But I don't think you should quit here. Just be here and sort of don't burn any bridges. And I was like, wow, I cannot escape this thing. I cannot make this sort of art was also sort of like no one I finished an education like no one expect that I will do this kind of like people will say this is stupid. I'll do it anyway, and I'm like, I know there is no money. I'm going for this sort of thing, and suddenly it hit me. From this point on, being an artist, you cannot do anything. It's just everything you're doing is just
trapped.
You're just wow. So you're also an engineer and making us like no, I quit it. Wow. So you really quit. But when are you coming back and then doing it like wow? I cannot escape. And then I sort of relaxed about it. Sort of used I guess sort of. Yeah.
Well, I guess the important lesson
use
there,
it what you actually can get out of it. Sort of sort of focus on the work and the process and
and the freedom that comes with, like we started with talking about the freedom that is available in art, where you can be a scientist, quote unquote, or whatever. That's the lesson there, right? Is that you don't have to paint. You're not Picasso. You're not. No. You can work on whatever. You could be an engineer and an artist.
Yeah. No, but it was also a bit sort of that conclusion. Maybe I can just be all the things. Maybe I just really sort of dig into what I actually want to do as work, and then So I just like the idea of that you actually cannot escape. You cannot make a sort of grand escape from art. It's
you are trapped.
You can maybe slowly die out, sort of from You can slowly die out, especially sort of no one will live, but you cannot make a grand escape.
So what happens when you're done? There you are. You're living in Odense. I assume that you want to go to Copenhagen because most artists.
Oh yeah, and also. My girlfriend at the time lived in Copenhagen, so I was sort of back and forth, and I don't know if it was just after or before. I also became a member of the Koinor, the sort of project room, actually.
And that's interesting.
And I was not from the very start, also.
Okay. Yeah. But I mean, it was an interesting space because it kind of there was a wave of artist-run spaces here in Copenhagen about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. And that was kind of the precursor to that. That opened before. Yeah. And actually got a fair amount of attention.
Yeah, it's sort of... Yeah, I think they were also sort of project rooms before us, but but it's sort of like, I think we were good at keeping it going.
I'm thinking
for
more
a long
like
time,
the
and
second
it seems
wave or
like
third wave.
also sort of we got because we were really bad at many sort of things of making profiles and doing all these things that might be good for a gallery, but then we had the time sort of then we actually sort of existed through many of the periods, and we actually sort of slowly also figured out ourselves what it was good for, and it sort of really slowly developed into an identity or something.
Well, it provided you with a space to work with, which is usually something that someone has to give you the stamp of approval to have.
Yeah.
You have to have a gallery say, okay, you can work here, or otherwise you're just stuck in the basement or your apartment or wherever else it is you might work.
And we could invite people, and we can just, and if you had a project, you could just, okay, if no one else, we will just show it ourselves, and we have something to work at and sort of something to discuss from, and sort of it could do many things, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice also to have this group of people where you meet and actually discuss, because in a way it also becomes sort of in a way a turning point or a way of discussion. So, okay, what do we actually think the Copenhagen art scene needs, and sort of what do we don't think Koh-i-Noor have to be, because it's everywhere. But what sort of like sort of rethinking ourselves in sort of in relation to the city also is kind of a nice discipline to sort of what is our
how do we relate to a certain art scene or a certain world,
and then just sort of keep insisting that this is also sort of art. This is also what it's. I think the biggest movement at some point, it was like the economy was going really fine, and new galleries, commercial galleries was popping up, and everything was about sort of painting in a specific way, and there were money in it, and sort of people was living in it. And we were very conscious. And at that point, I think we developed also as a space, sort of narrowing down, okay, we don't want to be that, we don't want to actually sell anything, but we want to sort of keep insisting that art is more than this, sort of the field is broader than what can be hung on a wall in.
Sure, and you guys are proven right after the crash when, everything changed in a way.
Yeah. We survived the crash. There were no money in it before and no money in it after.
We're still broke, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things I try to tell young people who are interested in, after you're done with an education, there's that idea of like, what the fuck now?
Yeah.
And like every once in a while, maybe you have some sort of relationship to a gallery or something, and you can just start commercially working, but most of the time you don't. Yeah. And I tell people, get together and do something together as a group, because you can find some way to either show work on your own terms, because that's going to teach you how to do that. Because that's one thing you don't really learn in school is all the administrative and project management and all those sort of practical things that go into running a website, a space, all that stuff. You said you guys weren't very good at, but you're better than the people who didn't even try, because you had some sort of experience. And then if you do this together long enough, it becomes legitimate. Yeah, it takes a while. Yeah, you have to eat a lot of shit. But it becomes, that's you don't need to wait for someone to tell you it's okay to make art and show art. No. And that's why these artist-driven spaces, or, even traveling curatorial blobbity blues, there's a lot of options out there that you can just grab. Yeah. Especially in Denmark, where there's a lot of options for funding. Yeah. So what happened to you guys? I mean, you were obviously working on that space, but you were at the same time trying to figure out your own practice post-school as well. Yeah. I assume you stopped painting at some point.
Yeah, but then it came a bit back and then forth. I didn't make sort of a grand cut in a way. Yeah. And also, I think a point also being that I was actually also connected to Asbæk from a very early on. And it still seems like a good idea to have a project space. I think for me that was a point, sort of like even a gallery cannot save you in a way.
If you're not ready, it's better to stay
also,
away.
Yeah, of course, maybe if you make paintings and it goes really well, but I have also seen careers that just stagnate and then just die out, or sort of like, it really seems like you wanted to have a more, of course, the word is a bit more useful, so sustainable practice, that you want to sort of make experiments, so you want to space where you can choose, you can do everything.
That is so important.
And then also have a sort of gallery. And I kind of like the fact that sort of this was also with Asbæk, and it was also sort of yeah, of course you do that. You have your own and do the, because then they actually sort of, the thing that are more commercial, then they are pushed a bit into the gallery, and the other things are pushed into Koh-i-Noor, and everyone is happy.
Right.
Because
right, they need each other.
Yeah, and they don't actually, things that cannot be sold is quite expensive to have in their sort of, on their square meters.
Right.
And sort of, it seems like, even though sort of people have but if you don't come into gallery, what then? But even if you come into a gallery, it will still not save it. Even if you come into 2 galleries, it will still not save you. You have to do this for 80 years now. So you might as well sort of expand your practice, sort of find out what you're doing and find out something that can intrigue you for 80 years on, and not sort of just stick to some kind of aesthetics. Now you're making...
This is what I do.
This is what I do, and it sells, and it will have to look like this forever, and sort of...
That's a nightmare.
Yeah, so I think that sort of idea of, even though it goes really well, you'll still have to build something else, something alternative. Just because I think art is bigger than what the market will tell you. Sort of the market is always going to be slow.
But how did you meet Asbæk? How did that relationship develop?
Actually, it was also sort of network. I think I was helping the Danish Pavilion sort of as an assistant in 2005, the year before I come out
in Venice. Yeah,
in Venice. And then I got an introduction to Patricia Asbæk, which is his mother, and then I got a meeting with Asbæk, and then sort of it took a while, and then I got a sort of a show up, sort of a test show, you can say, and then sort of slowly. But it was an introduction, and then I showed some things, and I got a meeting, and then sort of a year after.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing which people always want to know. How do you develop those relationships? And the weird thing is, it just kind of happens. Yeah. If you hang around long enough.
Yeah,
and
you
hang around.
Yes, I hang around somewhere, sort of like where things happen, or
You meet people. Be a nice person. Don't be an asshole. Like all those things play a role.
Or don't be an asshole too early, I guess.
Be an asshole, but later.
Yeah, just if you hit the asshole before you actually get it, really, then you have a problem. But
well, I mean, one of the things I'm super fascinated in is this art and technology thing, and I assume you're using your electronics background. Obviously, you're doing a lot of computer 3D modeling, things like that. Is that self-taught, that you've just slowly learned how to do that, or is that from the outside world too?
Yeah, it's self-taught. It was sort of like, I sometimes use it as sort of my sort of like when I've done something and I'm a bit sort of, I think my mind actually also works. I kind of relax sometimes, where I can sort of dig into a subject where it's sort of either it works or it doesn't. And I kind of like that it's sort of like, for example, sort of after you have made a show and sort of like, was it a success or was it not? Someone liked it, but what about these people that didn't say anything? So like art is so confusing about that sort of. Have you done a really great work, or is it sort of? Is it the sort of? You can sort of dig yourself in a very big hole, and I kind of like this duality of then actually doing something. I guess sort of a craft in a way, sort of digging into learning new things and sort of putting the theoretical thing aside, sort of concerning about whether it's art or not, but then just learning something and then sort of going back and through these sort of kind of modes of working on it, and that sort of then I told myself just
Well, one of the things I really enjoy is the fact that you have the blog with unfinished or kind of works without homes.
Yeah.
And then the website, which has more of like, this is a finished work, this is a show I had, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I actually just this morning was looking at the blog, and I think there's some really great stuff there that has a chance to exist in a different way because of its unformalized aspects.
That was also sort of the point about it, because it's sort of sometimes actually sort of the work seems like it reaches its peak without an exhibition, sort of like, and it will actually die if I sort of try to keep it alive for an exhibition, and sort of like, and I kind of like these idea of sometimes I make the count, and I can count sort of for the last year I have made an animation, about 2 animations a day, sometimes more.
Holy
and
shit.
Sort of small tests and everything, just try to keep working, and some days it's more, but it was just this movie archive of different kinds of, and I actually think that might be more close to the truth, but it's difficult because it has to be curated. In a way, I kind of like the fact that me just scrolling down, that's the perfect form, because if I actually try to formulate it or cut it or sort of, then it actually also dies. So there's kind of like this project that actually lives also before they get too formalized, and that was sort of like, so I actually try to think of actually also using sort of this Instagram thing, and also doing to sort of for this kind of things, but things that
a different platform.
Yeah, things that just what is this kind of thing, and then you put it away, kind of.
Right.
So that
what can this do?
Yeah, and not much more than kind of like that. People might see it as art or not see it as art, sort of. But but I like these. As you sort of the drone thing, it just seems like a good kind of work to do, but then it crashed, and it seems like, but now that seems like the perfect ending, sort of, and I kind of like that fact. I love that video. I love it. I kind of like that fact of working and sort of like I have to work in a way that makes sense, and sometimes it produces work, sometimes it just produces something else, and I think there is value in that, but it doesn't really make sense to produce that art. So sort of like, so that's sort of the idea of it. So I really like the fact of art being a way you work, and sometimes you actually show artworks, and sometimes maybe even the best artworks, it's the ones you don't really see. And anyway, you work and you produce, and it's maybe you're not the best curator of your own production sometimes. And
well, it speaks to the sustainability also over time, like you were talking about earlier. You may make. I've thrown away at least 3 bodies of work that I've spent a lot of money and time on. And I just had to. And when I say throw them away, I mean I just put them away, and then I'm. At least one of them now, 5 or 6 years later, is coming back because that material I produced has stuck in my head somewhere. Yeah. And as my ideas change and as my my interests change, I start to see, that material could actually be used for this idea or in this way, and that's why that constant experimentation builds up. It becomes part of a larger practice. You can reach back through all those old animations, and when you're thinking about a new idea, I'm interested in this idea. Wait, didn't I make an animation which kind of relates to this idea 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 years ago? And that way you have this kind of like this mountain of things that you're on top of all the time, and you can every once in a while go back and see, this wasn't right then, or with the idea I originally had thought, but it is right now. Yeah. And that I think speaks to the sustainability, instead of constantly being like, what can I make right now that's going to be a successful show, which is going to sell, which is going to, those are concerns you have to consider. Yeah. But in the meantime, there's your quote unquote practice. And that's a whole different beast.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just like you've been showing some of it on your blog. And for me, I reacted very positively to a lot of it, also because of the rough nature of it.
Yeah.
The fact that it isn't formalized so much in that sense. But do you, you know, I'm just trying to imagine you as a painter back in the day and you as an animator now, you know, like, can you say anything about that evolution from materials for you, you know, to move from a naive point of view about what expression is to a much more focused idea about what expression for you is?
Yeah, sort of. Sometimes I feel I haven't really moved at all in a way. But of course there is a sort of, I believe much less in figuration and sort of like actually depicting on things in a way. So that I think is a major, but also like, for example, for digital in this new exhibition, I actually like in a way also the role of an, you can say painter or sculptor, but just as an artist, like I put something out there. I have decided what colors they should be, sort of. I also like in a way also because digital is so sort of fluent, everything is everywhere and there is so much sort of like, there is a sort of center of this, whether you think it makes sense or you don't. And actually many of the things are sort of in a way hand done, sort of, they're crafted in a way. So I don't, kind of like it seems like it's coming back that I think I've seen sort of digital projects where sort of everything is just taking from here and taking from there and everything is a mixture and every theory goes and sort of everything is both
You're just pointing at shit.
They're just pointing at shit and it's like you're not in a sort of like you're nowhere in this kind of thing, but of course you have sort of. And I think it's a problem of also, then you cannot discuss anything. Sort of, you actually, I think actually also artists must properly deal with much lesser problems to actually sort of say something. Sort of. Right. Also, in you can see in a broad sense, and we were talking about technology. It's a complicated world. If you actually want to do also science, you're actually working on a very, very small kind of niche kind of thing to actually push that field a tiny bit forward.
Right.
And I think that is what I'm doing here. And sometimes it also seems like it's really old school kind of me doing research at my sort of, I want to do it myself. I want to learn it myself because I want to sort of push this small agenda. I don't want to say anything about sort of market economy, open source, Bitcoin, distributed, sort of social, right. Anything. Right. So now I just want to sort of talking about this surface we are dealing with, sort of. Right. And so at one point I see all this movement, but also sort of a circle actually coming back
right,
to.
So you are painting with a completely new material in the broadest of senses.
Yeah, I think sort of. At sometimes I was really, when you talk about, but what you're doing is just still painting and sort of for painting still. And then if you're talking about someone doing more sort of sculpture, but what you're really doing is just really sculpture. So people have their own agenda and they will put you into it. And it's not really a lie and it's not really true either. But the later I become, the older I become, I sort of like, yeah, you're right.
Like,
it's just old school and I'm just because I have those also it's so much technology and that's a problem in itself because it keeps a barrier and it has no sort of materiality and sort of it has no face value, it has no depth, it has no sort of. So I actually think maybe I actually need some of that old school kind of way of looking at art and looking at a picture, at a gallery, at a sort of, I'm looking at this is an artist trying to say something on a flat surface to me. I kind of like, maybe I'll need all that sort of old school stuff to actually say something. And so like,
Well, it waxes and wanes. I mean,
Yeah.
I noticed you use a 3D printer, which is literally the manifestation of ones and zeros to a physical object, which has a surface, a weight, a tactility, a color, all those sort of things. So that is that's a material, just like oil paint is a material. Do you go out and see art a lot? Do you engage with other?
Yeah. I do. I try to get as much out as I can. Yeah.
Does that affect your practice, or is that more just a personal interest?
No, that affects my what I do. It's sort of I very much see it as sort of leveling and sort of adjusting my outcome in a way. It very slowly maybe moves the generator, the motor, the practice, but I use it a lot to sort of, because actually sort of the last delivery bit also can mean quite a lot and can vary sort of. You
mean the presentation?
Yeah, the presentation sort of conceptual-wise, it's sort of like almost it's no to say it, but it actually makes a bit different if someone has made sort of the exact something that looks exactly the same in Germany, sort of, but just slightly bigger. Sort of like these things actually matter to keep the focus on actually what you're doing. So these things fluctuate. So in order to actually point at the deeper picture, I think sort of having a broader sense of what actually going on is important.
Yeah.
And I think also this exhibition is very much reacted to sort of this general art tendency of being very materialized focused. And I actually saw it as a sort of a bit of scary departure from having either it should be digital and really digital, hardcore digital, sort of pumping, being a sort of many screen projection, and now it's virtual reality sort of completely taking over, or sort of a pile of dirt in the gallery in a way. And I kind of like, I saw a problem in this kind of way of either you have material or you don't. But this other thing also has sort of material. It's sort of, I don't know. I sort of, it has not fully been sort of recognized, what's it called?
Like fleshed out?
No, fleshed out yet for me. But I think that's sort of in a way, a motto which I'm sort of working on. I think there might be a different sort of in between. I think it's problematic that you think this is too complicated or this move too fast, and then you go the completely other way and think, okay, but this is real. Sort of again, the stone. This stone is a stone, but you don't know shit about that stone. Sort of, this could be 50 million years, or it could not be. This tree could be actually, he could have cut it down for a tree that was sort of 6,000 years old. It sort of completely expands the idea of our sort of timeline. So like this idea of there being something that it's untrue and fake or representation or sort of digital and have nothing, and then this is sort of real. But I'm just thinking, I'm not sure the real is really real, or that you actually grasp the realness of that. And I'm not sure it's productive seeing every digital thing as being fake or being something that is not real, because I think it slips into our consciousness. It's a way of being, and it's a way of thinking, and it's actually we begin to think different in that sort of sense, and it has a tactility to it. I think sort of think of 3D animation as sort of just mimicking real world, and then it is just a real world. It's just a magical just place, and it has just a dragon. I think that's a problem with art has tackled all through the years of sort of like, but this is not real. This is an image you're looking at. You're looking at an image of something, and I think that's sort of,
this is not a pipe.
Yes, precisely. And I'm just trying to look at digital and saying this is not a dragon.
Well, I'm starting to see that you do, like, you kind of like put most of your things in that gray area between two things. You know, we've spent this whole conversation talking about science versus humanities, digital versus non-digital, you know, and it seems like you're always kind of interested in that area where the two things overlap and it's not really one or the other.
Yeah.
Which of course does speak to materiality and stuff, but it also speaks to progress, you know, in a weird way, in the way that technology is affecting our lives and so blah, 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 blah. Even though you say you don't want to talk about Bitcoins or know, whatever.
I just try to limit the things I'm saying. I
but
hope
the connotations come anyways with people.
Yeah.
Which is you know, unavoidable. Like you say, people will read whatever the fuck they want into anything. You know. Do you read a lot of theory, or are you engaged with art on the level of, you know, contemporary critical theory, etc.? Do you write about it? Do you do any of that stuff?
I don't write about it sort of per se. Sort of, I do try to formulate it, and sort of, I find it that I just find it difficult. So it's I have great respect for the ones that do it, and I find myself fixing press releases and then try to actually sort of correct problems with text more than I actually sort of engage it. And I definitely don't have a sort of poetic sense of using language. Great respect for people who do, but that's not. I cannot sort of. Yeah. Well, I find it difficult. Although sort of as a daily practice, you find yourself correcting even bigger mistakes. Sort of you think you're not good enough, but you will find people that sort of completely misses the point of your work, and sort of and then you will have to dig into it, of course. But
well, it's also a question of like, I don't know what this is, but I know it's not that.
Yes, precisely. So I think that is where I'm writing. I know what this is, but it's definitely not that. And let's have it sort of be a bit more open. Sort of the way I mostly go about it is to just, okay, how can I expand of what you're saying? Sort of, not every time it's sort of like, but when I'm talking about things, sort of trying to speak about the motor or sort of the inspiration I've got. So then people sort of, they can sort of concern themselves whether they think it's valuable or not, but just sort of talking a bit about the things that produce these kinds of work, and not be concerned about where it actually fits into a reference of every sort of kind, but sort of try to focus on giving sort of a bit extra in a way. That's how I sort of see the communication around it, and what I sort of try to aim at. And when I talked about sort of just giving an idea of people, also if you have people that actually don't really care for the things, that maybe they got an idea of, okay, at least you have done some time sort of what he's actually is doing, then it probably makes sense, sort of not trying to sort of, but it's because it reference to this and that, because that actually becomes sort of I think it can become sort of a empty shell, because whether it's a good artwork or not, that doesn't really translate, and that's really up to the people to actually see if they think this sort of makes any sense, or make them jiggle, or make them sort of, if they think this is poetry or not. I cannot really sort of start it, but I can sort of try to get a lot sort of in from both sides, and saying, I was sort of like, I have been working on this for this, and then I was kind of amazed by this. And for example, in this exhibition, it takes most of the aesthetics from the digital way of producing, not presenting material, sort of explaining sort of displaying them in this neutral way of putting them on different simple objects. So sort of like, I see my role in sort of explaining where sort of some of the ideas come from if people don't have that reference, sort of just helping that bit of sort of technical gap that might be. But
it's hard.
Yeah,
it's really hard, and I've come a long ways in terms of writing about my own work, but it also, like, there's the people who think that it's completely pointless to write about work. Work should stand on its own, and there should be no explanation whatsoever. I personally like when people write about it, because I do like to hear. I mean, obviously, I have a fucking podcast where I talk to people about why they do what they do. I like to understand more about it. Yeah. And I think that it isn't always obvious what the thoughts were behind something. So I appreciate attempts.
Yeah. Oh, but also actually like talking about it as well. So I like the fact that I have the work and I'm a communicator myself. Sort of there is these two. If people ask me, I will always try to get an explanation. I'll always sort of. I actually feel that it's a part of the job also to sort of defending your work and trying to. If people actually is interested in what you're doing, then you might elaborate and give them something a little more. So I think it's a vital part of it. I have just great respect of actually putting it down to words and.
Right. Well, writing's for the writers, right?
Yeah. Like sort of, it's a different discipline, and I don't think it. Yeah. I'm just not that. I don't think it reaches that greater level, or sort of. I think it becomes a little less interesting when I write too much about it.
Right.
But I like to talk about it, because then the discussion can be a little more fluid, and then.
Yeah, writing is final in a way.
Yeah, writing is final, and maybe also people can say, okay, maybe he's not sure about this thing.
This sounds like some bullshit.
Wow, now he's going out, but then again, also sort of transmitting the insecurity of not putting every word in.
Sure, and leaving some mystery. We also want that.
And sometimes actually, I find that with these smartphones and everything, that you can dictate everything. And it's actually really hard to dictate. Sort of, it sounds like a really simple thing, but then you actually have to speak really precisely and don't.
I've tried writing text messages with the vocal thing, and then it's really fucking hard.
It's two completely different things. And I kind of like that it becomes really obvious when it's a computer which just write what you. And now they are becoming that much greater, so they actually do it a pretty fine job, and it's just. You, which is the weak link, which don't make sense, and put in words that...
The singularity is coming.
Yeah. Sort of... it just points to you being very... Yeah.
Well, I think I want to wrap it up with something I've been thinking a lot about lately, which I've been asking people about, which is, what is the role of ego in an artistic practice? And I always have to say ego, not in terms of narcissism or Trump ego. I'm talking about the idea of self, ego in the most neutral terms. Because we need some sort of sense of self in order to do what we do. Yeah. But we also need some sort of openness in order to, work on what we do.
It takes a bit of confidence to actually see this object is important for other people as well. I guess I think the artist, but I've thought about it quite a bit when I got kids actually, because then for sort of from one day to another, it seems like the vanity of it sort of disappeared. Then it didn't feel like any value of just. Sort of when you're young, you're just, but I have to be between sort of, when I'm 30, I thought I have to be between the 10 best artists in Denmark before I'm 30. I was sort of like,
wow.
Well, sort of some arbitrary number kind of thing, but sort of like a thing you're saying before you get into sort of art school. But then you still have it a bit like you want to exhibition at that place, you want to.
You can't help but be attracted to the...
No. And you want to sort of... You imagine yourself being interviewed in that sort of... And you imagine yourself as an important person, sort of, when people will listen to... And then when you get kids, it's sort of everything just become invalid in a way. And sort of like, at some point, I was like, there was no... I didn't care at all if I was showing in this place. So at sort of a very brief sort of... moment, it just changed everything was going. I'm like, why? And then it all came back to, okay, I have to do something.
You have to have some motivation.
Yeah, and I actually love the work. So it's sort of, it came all the way back to the exact same thing. It's the work that actually makes sense. It's the work that actually makes me happy. It's the work where I'm not sort of, I don't think, I'm not sure, but keep on working, sort of trying this. Does it work? Does it make any sense or doesn't it make sense? That sort of essence of this wonderful thing that no one really expects from you, sort of, and no one pays for it, and no one sort of, but then it's all a mental kind of challenge and
right.
Yeah, this machine, the sort of coming into this, okay, it's for the work I do with it. It's for the mental, it's for the work. And then, of course, sometimes I have to exhibition it, and sometimes it has to build these. But these things is very hard to predict and very hard to control in a way. Sometimes you get invited, sometimes you have to do something yourself, but it's never really the thing you expected 5 years ago. Sort of, it's really difficult to actually make a plan, and it's really difficult to. And it's much more, I think, productive of having an idea of a strong driver that you produce work and you see this opportunity and get the best of that opportunity and sort of see the opportunities you actually get and then trying to get the best of them. And I think that was sort of my sort of pulling the ego a bit back and then just focusing on the work and the challenges and the
actual. Sort of, on the ground making this shit happen.
Yeah. And the actual sort of you're working your mind. It's sort of like you're not sitting in some job that you actually figured out to do 10 years ago and now you're just repeating it. Now you're constantly sort of taking tours with your brain where you're not sure if it all makes any sense or if it
where am I, what is going on?
yeah And I kind of like this fact of you're moving the system, sort of you're on unsafe ground, you're sort of you're gaining new knowledge and sort of I can do something I was able to do yesterday, but then there is a sort of a new problem. I kind of like this. It's the ongoing, the driver, the motor of the thing that's the most important, and then pulling the ego a bit back. But of course,
it wouldn't hurt to show at MoMA in New York.
No, it wouldn't hurt. But then again, I'm sure me sort of proclaiming that I will show there in 5 years will not get me in 5 years, but making the motor run smoothly and sort of continue working will probably be a better way of doing it, and sort of thinking that art is these things I have not really grasped yet. So will still working on. I'm still sort of questioning the things I do, and I will still come to another exhibition with the idea of, okay, there could be a kid which is half the year, so that could just have been sort of exploding the way of we are seeing people, and sort of where I have to sort of reflect on what I'm doing and sort of having this humble attitude about art. This is actually bigger than I am, and I could be wrong, and I could be sort of. There are probably people that are sort of sharper than sort of more on the edge, and I have to sort of still look and feel and take in, because it's sort of in a way bigger than I am. Yeah. I think that's a good way of. And I'm a bit happier actually. It becomes happier.
It's a lot easier sort of when you're not competing on that level. You know, when
yeah,
you just get just to focus on why you started doing this in the first place.
Yeah, and also what I figured out. Okay, what I remember it. I'm thinking of seeing Olafur's show at the Tate Modern. Sort of this giant. Wow, he's. I don't know how old he is, but my old sort of way of thinking that will also have sort of completely ruined, because there is sort of two problems with that. Either you actually get it. But then what you do actually then?
Fucking
and if
terrifying.
You don't get it, then it's sort of like, it has two problems actually. If you only go for sort of that goal, but then it's both a problem if you don't get it and if you get it, and I kind of like this fact also looking at older artists and like they can still produce great work without it being shown at a great place. And when you look at history, one comes into mind with I guess Balthasar's work for I will not make any more boring art. That's sort of a school that called in and sort of, can we do something? And he couldn't go there, and then he just mailed and they should read it. Kind of like that fact that it doesn't have to do with any institution. It doesn't have to do with any material. It doesn't have to do with whether you're being a sort of a senior artist or upcoming, sort of like art can actually sort of transfer all of these, sort of a simple idea to the right place, or the sort of, and I kind of like to use that as a guiding metaphor, that it actually is bigger than your vanity and your idea of self in a way.
That's fucking great.
Oh.
Thanks, Jesper.
Hope
I really
it makes
appreciate
some
it.
sense. Yeah,
It makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Undergang Armchair. The intro and outro music was forever kindly provided by Johnny Ripper, and today's interstitial music was provided by Saber Like. You can find links to their music and tons of other conversations with great people on our 3D rendering of a website, undergang.net. If you do like the show, we would appreciate it if you'd take a moment to leave a review on iTunes so others can find us. It's the best way to help. Thank you so much for joining us.